My 7-year-old grandson came to visit and asked, "Grandpa, do you know why Mommy is always sick?" At that moment, my son-in-law grabbed him by the arm and dragged him out of the room. That night, I went to their house to peek through the window. What I saw made my blood run cold, and he fainted after what I did. Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I never thought a 7-year-old's innocent question would shatter my world completely. It was a Thursday afternoon in November, and little Joshua had come to visit me like he did every other week. My grandson bounded through my front door with that endless energy only children possess. His backpack still slung over his small shoulders, his cheeks flushed from the autumn cold. "Grandpa Paul," he called out, throwing his arms around my waist. At 63, these moments with Joshua were the highlights of my weeks. Since my wife Margaret passed away 3 years ago, these visits were what kept me going. I ruffled his dark hair, so much like his mother Stella's when she was his age. "How was school today, buddy?" "Good. We learned about butterflies," he said, pulling away and looking up at me with those bright blue eyes. "Did you know they taste with their feet?" I chuckled, leading him to the kitchen where I'd already prepared his favorite snack, peanut butter crackers and apple slices. "I did not know that. Tell me more while you eat." As Joshua munched on his crackers, chattering about his day, I noticed something different about him. There were subtle changes I'd been picking up on over the past few months. He seemed more subdued than usual, more careful with his words. Sometimes he'd start to say something, then stop abruptly, as if remembering he shouldn't. Today was no different. He was telling me about his math test when suddenly he went quiet, staring at his hands folded in his lap. "What's wrong, buddy?" I asked, settling into the chair across from him. Joshua looked up at me, his small face serious in a way that made my chest tight. Children shouldn't look that worried. "Grandpa Paul," he said quietly, "do you know why Mommy is always sick?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I set down my coffee mug, my hands suddenly unsteady. "What do you mean, Joshua?" "She's always tired and sometimes she can't remember things. Daddy says she has a special sickness that makes her forget stuff." His voice was barely above a whisper. But yesterday I heard him on the phone saying she was getting worse and worse. My throat felt dry. Stella had been having health issues for the past 2 years, but Austin, her husband of 8 years, always assured me it was nothing serious. "Stress," he'd said, "maybe some vitamin deficiencies. Nothing to worry about." But looking at my grandson's troubled face, worry was exactly what I felt. "Sometimes adults get tired when they're stressed, Joshua. Your mommy works very hard." "No, Grandpa," Joshua's interruption was soft but firm. "It's different. She used to play with me and read me stories every night. Now she just stares at the wall sometimes, and when I talk to her, it's like she's not really there." Before I could respond, I heard the front door open. Austin's voice carried through the house, that carefully controlled tone he always used. "Joshua, time to go, buddy. We've got errands to run." My grandson's whole body tensed. The change was immediate and startling. The animated child who'd been telling me about butterflies just moments ago seemed to shrink into himself. Austin appeared in the kitchen doorway, tall and lean, with perfectly styled brown hair and that practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. At 35, he was successful, charming, and had swept Stella off her feet when she was going through a difficult divorce. At the time, I'd been grateful someone was making my daughter happy again. "Hey, Paul," Austin said, his smile widening as he spotted Joshua still in his chair. "Hope this little guy wasn't too much trouble." "Never," I replied, watching as Joshua quietly gathered his things. "We were just talking about school." Austin's eyes flickered to Joshua, then back to me. "That's great. Kids have such active imaginations, don't they?" He placed a hand on Joshua's shoulder, and I didn't miss how my grandson flinched slightly. "Come on, Josh. Mom's waiting in the car." "Stella's here?" I asked, already moving toward the front window. I hadn't seen my daughter in almost 3 weeks, which was unusual, even considering her health issues. "She's not feeling well today," Austin said quickly, steering Joshua toward the door. "Just one of those days, you know. The doctor says she needs to rest as much as possible." I followed them to the front door, craning my neck to see the car in my driveway. Through the passenger window, I could make out Stella's silhouette, but she seemed to be slumped against the seat, her head tilted back. "Maybe I should go say hello," I suggested, reaching for my jacket. "Actually, Paul, she's sleeping," Austin said, his hand still firmly on Joshua's shoulder. "The medication makes her drowsy, and we really shouldn't disturb her." Medication. This was the first I'd heard of any medication. "What kind of medication?" I asked, but Austin was already guiding Joshua down the front steps. "Just something to help with the fatigue," he called back over his shoulder. "Nothing serious. I'll have her call you when she's feeling better." I stood in my doorway, watching as they climbed into Austin's black SUV. Through the windshield, I caught a glimpse of Stella as Austin started the engine. Even from this distance, something about her posture alarmed me. She sat too still, too limp, like a puppet whose strings had been cut. As they backed out of my driveway, Joshua turned to look at me through the rear window. His small face was pressed against the glass, and even though I couldn't hear him, I could read his lips clearly. "Help, please." The SUV disappeared around the corner, leaving me standing alone in my doorway with a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. That night, I couldn't sleep. Joshua's question kept echoing in my mind, along with that desperate look in his eyes as they drove away. I'd raised Stella as a single father after her mother left when she was 12, and I knew my daughter better than anyone. The woman I'd glimpsed in that car wasn't the Stella I knew. By 2 a.m, I'd made up my mind. I needed to see what was really happening in that house. The next evening, I drove to their neighborhood just as darkness was settling over the suburban streets. Austin and Stella lived in an upscale development about 20 minutes from my house in a large colonial with perfectly manicured landscaping and security lights that cast long shadows across the front yard. I parked 3 houses down and waited, my heart pounding harder than it had in years. What was I doing? Spying on my own daughter's family like some kind of stalker? But Joshua's frightened face kept flashing in my mind, and I knew I couldn't ignore what I'd seen. Around 8 o'clock, I saw Austin come out the front door and get into his car. He was dressed nicely, as if going out for the evening. As his headlights swept past my hiding spot, I crouched lower in my seat. Once his taillights disappeared, I waited another 10 minutes before making my move. I slipped out of my car and made my way through the shadows toward their house, my feet crunching softly on fallen leaves. The living room windows were illuminated, curtains partially drawn but leaving enough of a gap for me to peer inside. What I saw made my blood run cold. Stella was on the couch, but she wasn't resting peacefully as Austin had claimed. She was hunched over, retching into a bucket, while Joshua, still in his school clothes, held a damp cloth to her forehead. My 7-year-old grandson was taking care of his sick mother while her husband was out somewhere, probably enjoying himself. But what shocked me even more was how frail Stella looked. In the harsh living room light, I could see how much weight she'd lost, how pale and gaunt her face had become. This wasn't just fatigue or stress. This was a woman who was seriously, desperately ill. And where was Austin? As I watched, Joshua helped his mother lie back on the couch, pulling a blanket over her trembling form. He kissed her forehead with the gentle care of someone far too young to have such responsibilities. That's when I heard the car in the driveway. Austin was back. I barely made it back to my car before Austin's headlights swept across the driveway. My heart hammered against my ribs as I crouched behind a neighbor's mailbox, watching him walk casually up to his front door, as if he hadn't just left his sick wife alone with their 7-year-old son. The next morning, I couldn't concentrate on anything. The image of Stella retching into that bucket, while little Joshua tended to her, haunted me. I'd been a father myself. I knew what real illness looked like, and what I'd seen through that window was far worse than Austin had been letting on. I had to talk to my daughter directly. At 10 o'clock, I called their house. Austin answered on the second ring, his voice cheerful and professional as always. "Paul, good to hear from you. How are you doing?" "I'm fine, Austin. I was hoping to speak with Stella. Is she feeling any better today?" There was a pause, just long enough to make me suspicious. "Actually, she's sleeping right now. The doctor prescribed some new medication yesterday, and it's really knocked her out. But it's supposed to help with the nausea." "Nausea?" At least he was admitting she was that sick. What kind of medication? I asked, grabbing a pen to write down whatever he told me. Oh, just some anti-nausea stuff. The doctor says it's pretty routine for her condition. His voice was smooth, practiced. I can have her call you when she wakes up. What condition, Austin? You keep saying she's sick, but nobody's given me any real answers about what's wrong with her. Another pause. It's complicated, Paul. The doctors are still running tests, but don't worry, we're taking good care of her. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone. Something about Austin's evasiveness made my skin crawl. In all the years I'd known him, he'd always been eager to share details about everything, his job, their vacation plans, Joshua's school activities. But when it came to Stella's health, he suddenly became vague and protective. I decided to visit unannounced. Their house was quiet when I arrived just after noon. I rang the doorbell and waited, listening for sounds of movement inside. After a few minutes, I heard slow footsteps approaching the door. When it opened, I barely recognized my own daughter. Stella stood in the doorway wearing a faded bathrobe, her once thick brown hair now thin and lifeless around her shoulders. She'd always been slender, but now she looked skeletal. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her skin had a grayish pallor that made her look years older than her 34 years. Dad? Her voice was hoarse, confused. What are you doing here? I came to see you, sweetheart. Can I come in? She hesitated, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Austin isn't here. He had to run to the office for a few hours. That's okay, I wanted to visit with you anyway. Reluctantly, she stepped aside to let me in. The house was dimmer than I remembered. Curtains drawn tight against the afternoon sun, the air had a stale, medicinal smell that made my stomach turn. How are you feeling, Stella? I asked, as we settled in the living room, the same room where I'd watched her being sick the night before. She tucked her legs under her on the couch, pulling her bathrobe tighter. I'm okay, just tired. But she didn't look okay. Up close, I could see the tremor in her hands, the way her eyes seemed to have trouble focusing on my face. Austin says you're on new medication. Yes? She nodded slowly, as if the movement required effort. It helps with the symptoms. What symptoms, exactly? What do the doctors think is wrong? Stella's brow furrowed, and she pressed her fingertips to her temples. It's hard to remember sometimes. Austin handles all the medical stuff. He talks to the doctors for me because I get confused. This wasn't like my daughter at all. Stella had always been sharp, independent, the kind of person who researched everything thoroughly before making decisions. The idea that she would let someone else handle her medical care without understanding it herself was deeply troubling. Where's Joshua today? I asked. School. She glanced at the clock on the mantel, squinting as if she couldn't quite make out the numbers. He should be home soon. We talked for another 20 minutes, but it was like trying to have a conversation with someone who was only half present. Stella would start a sentence and then trail off, forgetting what she was saying. She kept rubbing her stomach and complained of feeling nauseated. When I asked if she'd eaten lunch, she looked at me blankly. Austin usually brings me something when he gets home, she said. He takes such good care of me. As I was getting ready to leave, I asked to use the bathroom. Stella waved vaguely toward the hallway, already seeming to drift off where she sat. Instead of going to the guest bathroom, I quietly climbed the stairs to the master bedroom. I knew I was crossing a line, but something was very wrong in this house, and I needed to understand what. The master bathroom cabinet was filled with prescription bottles, more than I'd ever seen in one place. I pulled out my phone and quickly photographed the labels, my hands shaking as I tried to capture the information clearly. Most of the medications had names I didn't recognize, but several caught my attention immediately. High doses of anti-anxiety medication, sleep aids, and something called ondansetron, which I later learned was for severe nausea and vomiting. But what alarmed me most was the quantity. Some of these bottles had been refilled multiple times in just the past month. I was just putting the last bottle back when I heard a car door slam outside. Austin was home early. I rushed downstairs, trying to look casual, as I rejoined Stella in the living room. She was exactly where I'd left her, staring at the blank television screen. "Dad's here," she said when Austin walked in, as if she'd forgotten I'd been there the whole time. Austin's smile was bright, but his eyes were sharp as they scanned the room. "Paul, this is a nice surprise. How long have you been here?" "Just about a half hour," I said, watching his face carefully. "I wanted to check on Stella." "That's thoughtful of you." Austin set down a small paper bag on the side table. "I brought her some soup from that place she likes downtown. The doctor says she needs to try to keep more food down." He moved to Stella's side with practiced ease, helping her sit up straighter. "Time for your afternoon medication, honey." From the paper bag, he pulled out a small pill organizer and a bottle of water. I watched as he carefully counted out several pills into his palm, more pills than seemed necessary for any single dose. "What are all those for?" I asked. Austin glanced up, his smile never wavering. "Different things. Anti-nausea, vitamins, something for her stomach. The doctor has her on a pretty comprehensive regimen right now." Stella took the pills without question, washing them down with several sips of water. She didn't ask what she was taking or why. She just trusted Austin completely. As I watched this interaction, something cold settled in my stomach. The devoted husband caring for his sick wife should have been touching, but instead it made me deeply uneasy. "Well, I should let you two have some quiet time," I said, standing to leave. Austin walked me to the door, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder in a gesture that seemed friendly but felt controlling. "Thanks for stopping by, Paul. I know it means a lot to Stella to see you, even when she's not feeling her best." "Of course, she's my daughter. And Joshua loves his grandpa visits too. Maybe next week we can arrange another afternoon visit when Stella's feeling up to it." There it was again, Austin positioning himself as the gatekeeper, deciding when and how I could see my own family. That evening, I sat at my computer researching the medications I'd photographed in their bathroom. What I found made my blood run cold. Several of the drugs Stella was taking were known to cause the exact symptoms she was experiencing: confusion, memory loss, extreme fatigue, nausea. Taken individually and in proper doses, they might be legitimate treatments. But combined in the quantities I'd seen, they painted a terrifying picture. Someone was systematically poisoning my daughter, and Joshua, with the intuition that children sometimes possess, already knew something was terribly wrong. The next morning, I called Stella's doctor's office, the one Austin had mentioned her visiting regularly. When I identified myself as her father and expressed concern about her condition, the receptionist put me on hold for several minutes. "I'm sorry, mister." "Davidson," she said when she came back on the line, "Dr. Martinez says he can't discuss Ms. Stella's case with you unless she's present to give consent, or unless you're listed as her medical power of attorney." "Has she been seeing Dr. Martinez regularly?" "I really can't provide any information without proper authorization. Perhaps you could speak with her husband. He handles all of her appointments." Of course he did. That afternoon, Joshua called me from school, something he'd never done before. His small voice was barely audible over the phone. "Grandpa Paul, can you come get me? I don't want to go home today." My heart clenched. "What's wrong, buddy?" "Mommy was crying this morning. She was throwing up again, and Daddy got mad at her for making noise. He said if she couldn't be quiet, maybe she should go back to the hospital." Hospital. This was the first I'd heard of Stella being hospitalized. "Joshua, listen to me carefully. Are you safe right now?" "I'm at school, but I have to go home soon, and I'm scared." "Scared of what?" There was a long pause. When Joshua spoke again, his voice was even smaller. "I'm scared Mommy is going to die." Joshua's words echoed in my mind long after I hung up the phone. "I'm scared Mommy is going to die." The raw terror in my 7-year-old grandson's voice told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't a child's overactive imagination. This was a little boy watching his mother waste away and not understanding why no one was helping her. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to act. That evening, I drove back to their house, but this time, I came prepared. I parked 2 blocks away and walked through the neighborhood, using the cover of darkness and my knowledge of their routine. Austin typically left for his evening jog around 8:30, a habit that had developed over the past year, according to Stella's casual mentions during our phone calls. Sure enough, at 8:25, I watched from behind a neighbor's fence as Austin emerged from the house in running clothes. He stretched briefly on the front porch, then headed down the street in the opposite direction from where I was hiding. I waited 5 minutes to make sure he wasn't coming back, then made my way to the house. The spare key was still under the decorative rock by the back door, a hiding place Stella had shown me years ago when they first moved in. The house was quiet, except for the soft sound of a television coming from upstairs. I climbed the stairs carefully, avoiding the step that creaked, and found Joshua in his room watching cartoons while Stella lay in the master bedroom. "Grandpa?" Joshua's eyes went wide when he saw me in his doorway. "How did you get in?" I whispered, closing his door behind me. "I used the spare key." "Is your daddy home?" Joshua shook his head. "He went running. He always goes running after he gives Mommy her evening medicine." "Evening medicine." My stomach clenched. "Joshua, I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to tell me the truth, okay? You're not in trouble, but this is very important." He nodded solemnly, muting his cartoons. "How long has your mommy been this sick?" Joshua's brow furrowed as he thought. "A really long time. Maybe since before my last birthday. She used to make my breakfast every day, but now Daddy does it. And she used to read me stories, but now she forgets what page we're on. Since before his last birthday. That would be over a year ago, much longer than Austin had been telling me." "Does your daddy give your mommy medicine every day?" "Uh-huh. Lots of pills. In the morning, after lunch, and before bedtime. Sometimes more if she says her tummy hurts." "And does your mommy get sicker after she takes the medicine, or does she feel better?" Joshua was quiet for a long moment, his young face troubled. "She always gets sleepier, and sometimes she throws up. Daddy says that's normal, but—" He paused, looking down at his hands. "But what, buddy?" "But Mrs. Henderson next door takes medicine for being sick and she doesn't throw up. She gets better." Out of the mouths of babes, even a 7-year-old could see that something wasn't right. "Joshua, has your daddy ever told you not to talk about Mommy's medicine with other people?" He nodded quickly. "He says it would worry people, and they might try to take Mommy to a different doctor who doesn't understand her special sickness. He says I have to keep it secret to protect her." My hands clenched into fists. Austin was using Joshua's love for his mother to keep him quiet about what was happening. "Can you show me where Daddy keeps the medicine?" Joshua hesitated, clearly torn between obedience to his father and his growing concern for his mother. Finally, he slid off his bed and motioned for me to follow him. We crept down the hallway to Austin and Stella's bedroom. Stella was asleep, but even in the dim light from the hallway, I could see how labored her breathing was, how unnaturally still she lay. "In there," Joshua whispered, pointing to Austin's side of the bed. I opened the nightstand drawer and found what I was looking for, a small key. Joshua watched as I used it to unlock a metal box hidden in the back of Austin's closet. What I found inside made my blood freeze. The box contained dozens of prescription bottles, most with labels that had been partially torn off or altered. But more disturbing were the handwritten notes in Austin's neat script, documenting dosages and timing with scientific precision. It read like a researcher's log, tracking the effects of various drug combinations. But the most damning evidence was a folder filled with printed articles about undetectable poisons, drug interactions, and something that made my vision blur with rage, research on how to induce symptoms that would mimic various serious illnesses. Austin wasn't just giving Stella medication, he was systematically poisoning her and documenting the results. "Grandpa, you're shaking," Joshua whispered, touching my arm. I was shaking, with fury, with horror, with the devastating realization that my daughter was being slowly murdered by the man she trusted most. I quickly photographed everything with my phone, my hands trembling so badly I had to take several shots of each page to make sure they were clear. Then I carefully put everything back exactly as I'd found it. "Joshua," I said, kneeling down to his eye level, "I need you to listen very carefully. Your mommy is very sick, but not in the way your daddy says. The medicine he's giving her is making her sicker, not better." Joshua's eyes filled with tears. I knew something was wrong. Sometimes when Daddy's not home, Mommy tries to tell me things, but then she forgets what she was saying. "What kind of things?" "She says she loves me, and that if anything happens to her, I should remember that she loves me. And she says—" He paused, wiping his nose on his sleeve. "She says she wishes she could think more clearly, but everything is always fuzzy. Man, my heart broke for both of them, for Stella, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't understand or escape, and for Joshua, forced to watch helplessly as his mother deteriorated. I'm going to help her, I promised. But I need you to be brave a little longer, okay? Don't tell your daddy that I was here, and don't tell him about our conversation. Can you do that? Joshua nodded, but tears were streaming down his face now. Is Mommy going to die? I pulled him into my arms, this precious little boy who'd been carrying such a terrible burden. Not if I can help it. I promise you, Joshua, I'm going to save your mommy. I heard the front door open downstairs. Austin was back from his run. I quickly made my way to the back door, slipping out into the darkness just as I heard Austin's footsteps on the stairs. Through the window I watched as he went first to Joshua's room, then to check on Stella. From my hiding spot in the backyard, I could see into their bedroom. Austin moved with practiced efficiency, checking on Stella like a nurse might check on a patient. But there was something cold and clinical about his movements, devoid of the tenderness you'd expect from a loving husband. Then he disappeared into the bathroom, returning a moment later with a glass of water and several pills. I watched in horror as he gently woke Stella, helped her sit up, and handed her the medication. She took the pills without question, trusting him completely, not knowing that each dose was stealing more of her life away. After she'd settled back into sleep, Austin stood beside the bed for a long moment watching her. Even from a distance, there was something unsettling about his posture, the way he observed her like a scientist studying a lab specimen. Then he left the room, and I heard him go downstairs to his home office. I stayed hidden in their backyard for another hour, watching the light in Austin's office window. Whatever he was doing in there, he was completely absorbed in it. Around 10:30, the light finally went out, and I made my way back to my car. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the photographs on my phone and trying to process what I'd discovered. My son-in-law, the man I'd welcomed into our family, the man I'd trusted to love and protect my daughter, was slowly killing her. But why? What could Austin possibly gain from Stella's death? The answer came to me as I remembered conversations we'd had over the years about their finances. Stella had inherited a substantial amount when her mother died, close to $800,000 that she'd invested conservatively. She also had a life insurance policy through her work, and they'd purchased additional coverage when Joshua was born. If Stella died from a mysterious illness, Austin would inherit everything. He'd be a grieving widower with a young son, worthy of sympathy and support. No one would suspect that he'd orchestrated her death. Except now I knew, and I had proof. But I also knew that confronting Austin directly would be dangerous. If he realized that someone was onto his plan, he might accelerate whatever timeline he was following. Stella might not survive long enough for me to save her. I needed help, but who would believe such an incredible story? Austin was charming, respected in the community, and had been playing the role of devoted husband for years. Meanwhile, I was a grieving widower who might seem like an overprotective father making wild accusations. As dawn broke over my neighborhood, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to document everything Austin did, gather irrefutable evidence, and then I was going to destroy him. But first, I had to make sure Stella survived long enough for justice to be served. The next morning, I called in sick to my part-time job at the hardware store and drove to the local library. I spent hours researching the medications I'd photographed, learning about their effects and interactions. What I discovered confirmed my worst fears. Austin wasn't just poisoning Stella randomly. He was following a calculated plan designed to create symptoms that would appear to be a progressive, degenerative illness. The combination of drugs he was giving her would cause exactly the symptoms she was experiencing: confusion, memory loss, nausea, weakness, while leaving minimal traces in standard medical tests. It was diabolical in its sophistication. Around noon, my phone rang. It was Austin. "Paul, I'm afraid I have some bad news. Stella had a really rough night, and I'm taking her to the emergency room. She's been vomiting almost constantly and seems very disoriented." My grip tightened on the phone. Was this part of his plan, or had something gone wrong? "Which hospital?" I asked. already grabbing my keys. Mercy General, but Paul, the doctors are going to want to run some tests, and it might be a long day. Maybe you should wait until we know more before coming down. I'm her father. I'm coming. There was a pause. Of course. I'll text you when we know which room she's in. As I drove toward the hospital, one thought consumed my mind. I had to find a way to get Austin away from Stella long enough to tell her the truth. Even in her drugged state, she deserved to know what was being done to her, and I had to do it before it was too late. The emergency room at Mercy General was buzzing with its usual controlled chaos when I arrived. I found Austin in the waiting area, looking every inch the worried husband, rumpled clothes, disheveled hair, and dark circles under his eyes that spoke of a sleepless night caring for his sick wife. "Paul, thank God you're here," he said, standing to embrace me. His performance was flawless, right down to the slight tremor in his voice. "The doctors have her stable now, but it was touch and go for a while." "What happened exactly?" Austin ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I'd seen him use countless times when he wanted to appear vulnerable. "She started vomiting around 3 in the morning and couldn't stop. By the time we got here, she was severely dehydrated and barely coherent. They've got her on IV fluids now, but the doctors want to keep her for observation." "Can I see her?" "She's sedated right now. They gave her something strong for the nausea." Austin's eyes met mine, and for just a moment I caught a flicker of something cold beneath the concerned husband facade. But maybe later, when she's more alert. I spent the next 2 hours in that waiting room, watching Austin play his role to perfection. He spoke with nurses using medical terminology that showed he'd been dealing with Stella's condition for a long time. He fielded concerned calls from neighbors and Stella's co-workers, his voice heavy with barely controlled emotion. To everyone around us, he was the devoted husband of a chronically ill woman, holding their family together through an impossible situation. Only I knew he was the monster destroying it. Around 4 in the afternoon, a young doctor with kind eyes approached us. "Mr. Austin, I'm Dr. Rebecca Chen. I've been overseeing your wife's care today." Austin stood immediately, his posture radiating anxious hope. "How is she?" "Stable, but I have to be honest with you. I'm concerned about some of her symptoms. The combination of severe dehydration, disorientation, and the muscle tremors we observed suggests something more complex than a simple stomach bug." My heart raced. Finally, a medical professional was seeing through Austin's carefully constructed narrative. "What kind of something?" Austin asked, and I noticed his jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. "I'd like to run some additional tests. Blood work, possibly a toxicology screen. Has your wife been taking any new medications recently? Any changes to her regular prescriptions?" Austin hesitated for just a beat, so brief that Dr. Chen probably didn't notice, but I caught it. "Nothing new, just her regular medications for the digestive issues she's been having. I can get you a complete list." "That would be helpful. I'd also like to speak with Mrs. Davidson directly about her symptoms. Sometimes patients notice things that family members might miss." "Of course," Austin said smoothly. "Though I should warn you, she's been having some cognitive issues lately. Memory problems, confusion. It might be difficult for her to give you accurate information." Dr. Chen nodded sympathetically. "We see that sometimes with chronic illness. The stress and pain can affect mental clarity, but I'd still like to try." Austin glanced at me, then back at the doctor. "Actually, would it be possible for me to be present when you speak with her? She gets anxious when she's alone with strangers, and I can help clarify anything she might not remember correctly." Every instinct I had screamed that I couldn't let Austin be alone with Stella and that doctor. If Dr. Chen was getting suspicious, Austin would find a way to manipulate the situation. "Dr. Chen," I interjected, standing up, "I'm Paul Davidson, Stella's father. Would it be appropriate for me to visit with her first? I've been very worried, and I'd like to see her before she gets too tired from medical questions." Austin's smile flickered, but he recovered quickly. "Of course, Paul. I'm sure Stella would love to see you. I'll just grab us some coffee from the cafeteria while you visit." Dr. Chen nodded. "Room 217. But please keep the visit brief. She needs her rest." As we walked toward the elevator, Austin put his hand on my shoulder. "Paul, I want to prepare you. She looks pretty rough right now. Don't be alarmed by how weak she seems. The doctors say that's normal with this level of dehydration. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Austin was already laying the groundwork for what I'd find, making sure I wouldn't be shocked enough to ask too many questions. Room 217 was dimly lit, machines beeping softly in the background. Stella lay in the hospital bed, looking impossibly small and fragile, her skin waxy and pale against the white sheets. An IV line ran from her arm to a bag of clear fluid hanging beside the bed, but her eyes were open, and when she saw me, they focused with more clarity than I'd seen in months. "Dad." Her voice was hoarse, but there was recognition there, real recognition, not the confused fog I'd grown accustomed to. "I'm here, sweetheart." I took her hand, shocked by how thin and cold it felt. "Well, how are you feeling?" "Better than I have in a long time, actually." She tried to sit up straighter, wincing at the effort. "The IV is helping, I think. My head feels clearer." This was my chance. Austin would be back soon, and who knew when I'd get another opportunity to speak with Stella alone. "Stella, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully. Do you remember what medications you've been taking at home?" Her brow furrowed. "Austin handles all that. He gives me pills every day, but I can never remember what they're for. Everything's been so foggy lately." "When did the fogginess start? Do you remember?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the ceiling. "It's been gradual, I think, but it got much worse after Joshua's birthday party last year. I remember feeling okay that day, playing games with the kids, feeling like myself. But then the next week, I started having these episodes where I couldn't remember conversations or where I'd put things. That timeline matched what Joshua had told me. Austin had escalated whatever he was doing to her around that time. Stella, this is very important. How do you feel right now compared to how you've been feeling at home?" "Like I said, clearer, less nauseous. The tremors in my hands have stopped." She looked down at her hands as if surprised by their steadiness. "Why?" I took a deep breath, knowing that what I was about to say would shatter her world. "Stella, I think Austin has been making you sick. I think he's been putting things in your food or your medicine that are causing your symptoms." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression cycling through confusion, disbelief, and then something that looked like recognition. That's crazy, Dad. Austin loves me. He takes care of me. I know how it sounds, but think about it. You feel better now than you have in months, right? And the only difference is that you're here, where Austin can't control what you're taking." Stella's breathing quickened, and I could see her mind racing. "But why would he? We're married. We have Joshua together. Why would he want to hurt me?" I'd been dreading this question, but she deserved the truth. "Money, sweetheart. Your inheritance. Your life insurance. If something happens to you, Austin gets everything." Tears began streaming down her face, but her voice was stronger than I'd heard it in months. "I've been so scared, Dad. I thought I was losing my mind. Sometimes I'd try to remember things and it was like trying to grab smoke. And Joshua," she gasped. "Oh God, Joshua's been watching all this. He's been taking care of me when Austin wasn't around. He's been worried about you. He asked me why you were always sick. What kind of mother have I been to him? I can barely remember the last time I read him a bedtime story or helped him with his homework." The machines around her bed began beeping more rapidly as her heart rate increased. "None of this is your fault," I said firmly. "Austin did this to you, but we're going to stop him." "How? Who's going to believe us?" "Austin's been telling everyone that I have some kind of progressive illness. He's been taking me to doctors, and they all think I'm just sick." Before I could answer, I heard footsteps in the hallway. Austin's voice was getting closer as he spoke with someone, probably Dr. Chen. "Listen to me," I whispered urgently. "When Dr. Chen asks you questions, tell her exactly how you feel right now. Tell her that you feel clearer and better than you have in months. And tell her you want them to test your blood for things that shouldn't be there. What if Austin? I won't let him hurt you anymore, I promise." The door opened, and Austin walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee, Dr. Chen right behind him. His eyes immediately went to Stella's face, and I saw him register that she looked more alert than usual. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" he asked, setting the coffee down and moving to her bedside. His voice was gentle, loving, but I caught the sharp way his eyes assessed her condition. "Better," Stella said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "Much better, actually." "Peor." Austin's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's wonderful. The IV fluids must be helping." Dr. Chen stepped forward with her clipboard. "Mrs. Davidson, I'd like to ask you a few questions about how you've been feeling lately. Can you describe your symptoms for me?" I watched Austin's face carefully as Stella began to speak. For the first time since I'd known him, cracks appeared in his perfect facade. When Stella mentioned that she felt clearer and more alert than she had in over a year, Austin's jaw clenched. And when Dr. Chen asked if she wanted additional blood tests to run, including a comprehensive toxicology screen, Austin went completely pale. "Is that really necessary?" Austin interjected. "We've run so many tests already, and they've all come back normal. I hate to put Stella through more procedures when she's finally feeling a little better." Dr. Chen looked at him curiously. "Actually, Mr. Austin, your wife specifically requested the tests. As the patient, the decision is ultimately hers." Austin's mask slipped entirely for just a moment, and I saw raw panic flash across his features. "Of course, I just want what's best for Stella." But it was too late. Dr. Chen had seen his reaction, and I could tell she was now viewing him with new eyes, not as a devoted husband, but as someone who had something to hide. "I'll have the lab run the full panel," she said to Stella. "We should have results back within 24 hours. Austin nodded stiffly, but I could see his mind racing, calculating his next move. As Dr. Chen left the room, Austin turned to me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Paul, could I speak with you privately for a moment, in the hallway?" I squeezed Stella's hand. "I'll be right back." In the corridor, Austin's friendly demeanor evaporated entirely. When he spoke, his voice was low and cold, colder than I'd ever heard it. "I don't know what kind of poison you've been whispering in Stella's ear, but I want it to stop. She's sick, Paul, very sick, and filling her head with paranoid delusions isn't helping anyone." "The only poison here is what you've been giving her," I replied, keeping my voice steady, despite the rage boiling inside me. Austin stepped closer, and for the first time, I saw the real man behind the charming facade. "You're treading on dangerous ground, old man. Stella is my wife, and Joshua is my son. If you try to interfere with my family, you'll regret it." "Is that a threat?" "It's a promise." Austin's smile returned, but it was predatory now. "Accidents happen to elderly people all the time, especially ones who don't know when to mind their own business." In that moment, I realized just how far Austin was willing to go to protect his secret. He wasn't just poisoning Stella. He was capable of anything. And he'd just made the mistake of threatening the wrong person. Austin's threat hung in the air between us like poison gas, but instead of fear, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. A cold, calculating fury that reminded me of my days in the military 40 years ago. This man had underestimated me completely. "You know what, Austin?" I said, keeping my voice level and calm. "I think you're right. Maybe I have been overreacting. Stella does look tired, and I suppose the stress of everything has been getting to me too." Austin's predatory smile widened, clearly believing he'd successfully intimidated me into backing down. "I'm glad you understand, Paul. We're all on the same team here. We all want what's best for Stella and Joshua." "Of course we do," I nodded agreeably. "Why don't you go back in and spend some time with her? I think I'll head home and let you two have some privacy." "That's probably for the best," Austin agreed, his confidence fully restored. "I'll call you later with an update on how she's doing." As I walked away, I could feel Austin's eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. I needed him to believe that his threat had worked, that I was retreating like a frightened old man. But I wasn't retreating. I was regrouping. The moment I got to my car, I called my neighbor Tom Harrison, a retired police detective who'd become a good friend over the past few years. We'd bonded over weekend fishing trips and shared stories about losing our wives to cancer. "Tom, I need your help with something serious," I said without preamble when he answered. "What's going on, Paul?" "I think my son-in-law is trying to kill my daughter." There was a pause. "That's a hell of an accusation. You better come over and tell me everything." An hour later, I sat in Tom's kitchen, showing him the photographs I'd taken of Austin's drug collection and research materials. Tom studied each image with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent 30 years building criminal cases. "This is substantial," he said finally, "but it's also complicated. Austin hasn't technically committed a crime that we can prove yet. He's her husband, and he could claim he's just managing her medication under a doctor's supervision. But the research materials, the articles about undetectable poisons, could be explained as a concerned husband trying to understand his wife's mysterious illness." Tom leaned back in his chair. "Don't get me wrong, Paul. I believe you. But proving it in court is going to be challenging." So what do we do? We need irrefutable evidence? The toxicology screen will help, but Austin's smart enough to know that's coming now. He'll find a way to explain away any results. Tom tapped his fingers on the table, thinking, what we need is to catch him in the act. How? We set a trap, make him think he needs to accelerate his timeline, then document exactly what he does. That night, I lay awake planning every detail of what Tom and I had discussed. Austin thought he'd neutralized me with his threats, but he was about to learn that threatening a grandfather's family was the worst mistake he could have made. The next morning, I called the hospital and asked to speak with Dr. Chen. When she came on the line, I could hear the concern in her voice. "Mr. Davidson, I'm glad you called. We got some preliminary results back from your daughter's blood work, and there are definitely some abnormalities we need to discuss." My heart raced. "What kind of abnormalities?" "Elevated levels of several substances that shouldn't be present in those concentrations. I'd like to keep her for a few more days for observation and additional testing." "Does Austin know about this?" "Not yet. I wanted to speak with Stella first, but she specifically asked me to call you. She seems concerned about something." "Dr. Chen, I need to tell you something, but I need your word that you'll handle this professionally and not put my daughter in any more danger." There was a pause. "Mr. Davidson, if you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting, you need to know that I'm obligated to report suspected abuse to the authorities." "Good, because that's exactly what I'm hoping you'll do." 2 hours later, I was back at the hospital, but this time I wasn't alone. Tom had come with me, along with Detective Sarah Martinez from the County Sheriff's Department. We met with Dr. Chen in a small conference room down the hall from Stella's room. The blood work confirms elevated levels of several benzodiazepines and antihistamines, Dr. Chen explained, showing us the lab results. The combination and dosages are consistent with deliberate poisoning designed to cause confusion, memory loss, and physical weakness. Detective Martinez leaned forward. "How certain are you that this wasn't accidental or prescribed?" "Very certain. No legitimate medical treatment would involve this combination of drugs in these quantities. Someone has been systematically drugging Mrs. Davidson for an extended period. We need to get her somewhere safe," I said. "If Austin realizes that we know what he's been doing—" "He already suspects," Tom interrupted. "Paul told me about the conversation in the hallway yesterday. Austin knows the net is closing." Detective Martinez nodded grimly, which means he might try to finish what he started before we can stop him. "What do you mean?" I asked, though I was afraid I already knew. "If he thinks he's about to be exposed, he might give her a fatal dose and claim she died from her illness. Once she's dead, it becomes much harder to prove what he was doing." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. We were in a race against time, and Austin held all the cards as long as he had access to Stella. "We need to catch him trying to give her something," Detective Martinez continued. "With video evidence, we can arrest him and build a solid case." "How do we do that without putting Stella at risk?" Dr. Chen spoke up. "We could set up a controlled situation. Tell Austin that Stella is being discharged tomorrow morning, but that she needs to take some special medication tonight to prepare for going home. Then we monitor her room and see what he does." "That's incredibly dangerous," I protested. "What if he actually gives her something lethal?" "We'll have medical staff standing by," Dr. Chen assured me, "and will intervene before any permanent damage is done." "It's the best option we have," Tom added. "Otherwise, Austin just gets more careful, and it becomes impossible to prove what he's doing." Detective Martinez was already pulling out her phone. I'll get the surveillance equipment set up in her room. We'll have multiple cameras and officers stationed nearby. That afternoon, we put our plan into motion. Dr. Chen called Austin to give him the good news that Stella was responding well to treatment and could go home the next morning. "That's wonderful," Austin replied, his voice full of relief. "She'll be so happy to get back to her own bed." "There is one thing," Dr. Chen continued smoothly. "We need her to take a course of medication tonight to help prevent any relapse once she's home. It's pretty standard procedure, but the timing is important. She needs to take it around 9 o'clock tonight." "Of course, whatever she needs. The medication might make her drowsy, so you might want to say your goodbyes before 9 in case she sleeps through the night." There was a slight pause. "I understand. I'll make sure to spend some quality time with her this evening." After Dr. Chen hung up, we all looked at each other grimly. Austin had taken the bait, but now we had to wait and see how he would respond. I spent the rest of the afternoon with Stella, who was looking stronger and more alert with each passing hour. The difference was remarkable. Without Austin's daily poisoning, her body was already beginning to recover. "I keep thinking about Joshua," she said, holding my hand. "How much has he seen? How much does he know?" "He knows something's wrong, but he doesn't understand what. He's been trying to protect you in his own little way." Tears filled her eyes. "My baby's been taking care of me when I should have been taking care of him." "That's not your fault, Stella. Austin manipulated the situation to make you helpless. But I should have known. I should have realized that loving husbands don't make their wives sicker. Austin is very good at manipulation. He had me fooled for years, too." Around 7 o'clock, Austin arrived with Joshua in tow. My grandson ran to his mother's bedside, his face lighting up when he saw how much better she looked. "Mommy, you look so much better." "I feel better, sweetheart," Stella said, gathering him in her arms. Much better." Austin watched this interaction with a carefully neutral expression, but I caught something flickering in his eyes. Calculation. He was already planning his next move. "Joshua, why don't you go get some ice cream from the cafeteria?" Austin suggested, pulling out his wallet. "Your mom and I need to talk about some grown-up stuff." "Can Grandpa come with me?" Joshua asked, looking between his parents. "Actually, I need to head home soon," I said, standing up. "But you enjoy that ice cream, buddy." I hugged Stella goodbye, whispering in her ear, "Remember what we talked about? Don't take anything Austin gives you directly. Make sure a nurse handles all your medication tonight." She nodded almost imperceptibly. As I walked out of the hospital, Tom and Detective Martinez were setting up their surveillance equipment in the security office. Everything was in place. Now we just had to wait for Austin to make his move. At 8:45 that evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Detective Martinez. "He's making his move." Austin just went into the bathroom and came out with something in his hand. My heart pounded as I waited for the next update. 8:57. "Nurse just came in with the prescribed medication. Austin is trying to convince her to let him give it to Stella himself." 9:03. "Nurse left. Austin is alone with Stella now." 9:07. "He's pulling something out of his pocket. Small vial. He's adding it to the water cup." 9:09. "He's trying to get Stella to drink the water. She's refusing, asking for the nurse." 9:12. "Austin is getting agitated. He's insisting she needs to drink the water before the medication will work properly." 9:15. "Officers are moving in. Austin just grabbed Stella's arm and tried to force her to drink." My phone rang. It was Detective Martinez. "We got him, Paul. Austin is in custody, and Stella is safe." The vial he was carrying contained a lethal dose of digoxin, enough to cause heart failure that would look like a complication from her existing condition. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed with relief and rage. Austin had actually tried to murder my daughter right there in the hospital room, believing that her death would be attributed to her mysterious illness. What happens now? Now we build the case that's going to put him away for the rest of his life. But even as relief flooded through me, I knew our battle was far from over. We'd caught Austin in the act, but the damage he'd done to our family would take much longer to heal. The real work, helping Stella recover and ensuring Joshua felt safe and loved, was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my house, now our house, watching Joshua help his mother make pancakes for breakfast. The scene was so ordinary, so beautifully normal, that it brought tears to my eyes. Stella's laughter filled the room as Joshua got flour all over himself, his face scrunched up in concentration as he tried to flip a pancake that was definitely too big for the spatula. Her laugh was something I'd thought I might never hear again. Genuine, unforced, alive. "Grandpa, look!" Joshua called out proudly, holding up a misshapen pancake that looked more like an abstract art project than breakfast food. "I made this one special just for you." "It's perfect," I said, and I meant it. Everything about this moment was perfect. The transformation in both of them over the past 6 months had been nothing short of miraculous. Stella's physical recovery had been swift once Austin's systematic poisoning stopped. Within weeks, the tremors in her hands disappeared, her color returned, and her mind cleared completely. But the emotional healing had taken longer. The trial had been difficult for all of us. Austin's defense team tried every angle they could think of. They claimed Stella was mentally unstable, that I was a manipulative father-in-law trying to break up their marriage, that the medical evidence was inconclusive. But the video footage of Austin trying to force that lethal dose of digoxin into Stella's water cup was impossible to explain away. Detective Martinez had done thorough work building the case. They'd found Austin's computer browser history filled with research on untraceable poisons, life insurance policies, and methods for inducing symptoms that would mimic natural illnesses. They'd tracked down Austin's ex-girlfriend from college, who testified that he'd exhibited controlling and manipulative behavior even then. Most damning of all was Austin's own documentation, those meticulous notes he'd kept tracking Stella's reactions to different drug combinations. His scientific approach to slowly killing his wife had provided the prosecution with a detailed record of premeditation. Austin was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole for attempted murder and aggravated assault. The judge called it one of the most calculated and cold-blooded cases she'd ever seen. But the real victory wasn't Austin's conviction, it was watching my family heal. Stella had moved in with me temporarily while she rebuilt her strength and figured out her next steps. Joshua had his own room here now, decorated with his drawings and the butterfly collection he'd started. After that day, he told me about tasting with their feet. What was supposed to be a temporary arrangement had gradually become permanent, as we all realized we were happier together than apart. "Dad, do you think Joshua's ready to hear the whole truth?" Stella asked me one evening about 3 months after the trial, after we'd tucked him into bed. "What truth hasn't he heard?" "About what Austin was really doing, about why I was so sick for so long." She wrapped her hands around her coffee mug, staring into the steam. "He knows Austin was a bad man who hurt me, and that's why he's in prison. But he doesn't know the details." I considered this carefully. Joshua had been remarkably resilient through everything, but he was still only 8 years old. How do you explain to a child that his father had been slowly murdering his mother? What does he ask about? Sometimes he asks if Austin will ever come back. Sometimes he asks if it's his fault that Austin hurt me. Her voice broke slightly on that last part. He thinks maybe if he'd been a better son, Austin wouldn't have been angry at our family. My heart clenched. Even after everything, Joshua was still carrying guilt. That belonged entirely to Austin. "He needs to know it wasn't his fault," I said firmly. "But maybe we can give him age-appropriate truth. He doesn't need all the medical details, but he needs to understand that Austin's actions had nothing to do with him or even really with you. Austin was sick in his mind, and that made him dangerous." The next morning, the three of us sat down together in the living room. Joshua sensed immediately that this was going to be a serious conversation. He got that focused, worried look he'd worn too often in his young life. "Joshua," Stella began, taking his small hands in hers, "I want to talk to you about Austin and about why I was so sick for so long." "Okay," he said quietly. "You remember how I used to be confused a lot? How I couldn't remember things and I was always tired and throwing up?" Joshua nodded. "Well, it turns out I wasn't really sick with a disease. Austin was putting bad medicine in my food and drinks that made me feel sick. He did it on purpose, over and over again, for a very long time. Joshua's brow furrowed as he processed this information. But why would he do that? You're nice to him. You made him dinner and did his laundry and everything. Sometimes people's minds get sick in a way that makes them want to hurt others, even people they're supposed to love. Austin's mind was sick like that, but it wasn't because of anything you or I did wrong. It was something broken inside him. Is that why he's in prison? Because he made you sick on purpose? Yes, sweetheart. And he's going to stay there for a very long time, so he can never hurt anyone again. Joshua was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Finally, he looked up at his mother with those serious blue eyes. I'm glad you're better now, Mommy, and I'm glad we live with Grandpa. It feels safer here. It is safer here, Stella assured him, pulling him close. And you never have to worry about Austin coming back. The police and the judges made sure of that. That conversation marked a turning point for all of us. Joshua stopped asking if it was his fault, stopped looking over his shoulder, expecting Austin to appear. Stella stopped apologizing for things that were never her responsibility, and I stopped walking around with the constant fear that I might lose them both. But perhaps the most meaningful change was how we functioned as a family unit. Joshua called me Grandpa, but in many ways, I'd become the father figure he'd never really had. Austin had been too busy planning Stella's death to build any real relationship with his son. Now Joshua and I worked together on homework, played catch in the backyard, and had long conversations about everything from dinosaurs to why the sky was blue. Stella found work at a local veterinary clinic, something she'd always wanted to do, but Austin had discouraged. She was amazing with the animals and their worried owners, her natural empathy enhanced by her own experience of helplessness and recovery. On weekends, we established new traditions: Saturday morning pancakes, Sunday afternoon walks in the park, movie nights with popcorn, and heated debates about which superhero was the strongest. Simple pleasures that felt revolutionary after years of fear and confusion. One evening in late spring, as we sat on the back porch watching Joshua chase fireflies in the yard, Stella turned to me with tears in her eyes. I never thanked you properly, she said. For what? For not giving up. For believing something was wrong when everyone else thought I was just chronically ill. For saving my life. Or I watched Joshua carefully cup a firefly in his hands, his face glowing with wonder as the tiny light blinked between his fingers. You would have done the same for me, I said simply. Would I? I was so deep in that fog Austin had created, I don't know if I would have been able to see clearly enough to help anyone. But you did see clearly when it mattered most. You asked Dr. Chen for those blood tests. You refused to drink that water when Austin was trying to force you. Your survival instincts were still there, even when your mind was clouded. She leaned against my shoulder, and we sat in comfortable silence watching our boy play. Our boy, because that's what Joshua had become to me. Not just my grandson, but my son in every way that mattered. I've been thinking about legally changing Joshua's last name, Stella said quietly, to Davidson. I want him to have your name, not Austin's. My throat tightened with emotion. Are you sure? I'm sure. Austin was never really his father anyway. You are. You're the one who's been here for all the important moments, the one who loves him unconditionally. Later that night, after Joshua had fallen asleep between us during our movie, a common occurrence that none of us minded, I carried him to his bed and tucked him in. As I kissed his forehead goodnight, he stirred sleepily. Grandpa? Yes, buddy. I love living here with you and Mommy. I love having you here. Are we going to stay together forever? As long as you want to, Joshua. This is your home now. He smiled and drifted back to sleep, secure in the knowledge that he was safe and loved. As I turned off his light and headed to my own room, I reflected on how drastically our lives had changed. A year ago, I'd been a lonely widower, cut off from my daughter and grandson by a manipulative sociopath who was slowly murdering the woman I'd raised to be strong and independent. Now I had my family back, not just restored, but stronger than we'd ever been. We'd survived Austin's attempt to destroy us, and in doing so, we'd discovered our own resilience and capacity for healing. The house felt full again, full of laughter and conversation, full of Joshua's artwork on the refrigerator and Stella's medical textbooks on the coffee table, full of the sounds of a family that had chosen each other and fought to stay together. Austin had tried to erase us, to reduce Stella to a victim and Joshua to a traumatized orphan. Instead, he'd created something he never anticipated, a family bond that was unbreakable, because it was built on truth, survival, and unconditional love. Sometimes I still woke up in the middle of the night, momentarily panicked that it was all a dream, that Stella was still wasting away in Austin's house while I stood helplessly by. But then I'd hear Joshua's gentle snoring from down the hall, or catch the scent of Stella's shampoo in the bathroom, and I'd remember that we were all safe now. We were home, and Austin, the man who'd thought he could manipulate and control us all, was exactly where he belonged, locked away where he could never hurt anyone again, while we lived the life he'd tried to steal from us. Justice had been served, but more importantly, love had won.